When you hear the phrase soft as steel, what do you think of? While the word steel might conjure up images such as massive high-rise buildings, where does the soft part come in? And what exactly does this mean in our work and in our lives? Welcome to the Soft as Steel podcast with your host, Dennis Doran, featuring engaging conversations with a wide range of industry leaders around soft skills, how we practice love, inclusion, social justice, and compassionate leadership that's everlasting in the workplace. And now, here's Dennis Doran.
I feel especially blessed today to have as my guest a gentleman who goes by one name, Tats. Tats is someone I met just a few weeks ago. And again, I know the folks that come to this conversation fairly well before they arrive. I know a bit about Tats, and I had the privilege of being on his podcast a few weeks ago and found him to be not only interesting, but just really cool to talk to. Tats is the co-founder and CEO of Castagra Products, a manufacturer of high adhesion roof coatings, and the host of the Specified Growth podcast. That's one of 2.5 that he hosts. I might get him to mention the others as well if it's not in my intro. Castagra helps contractors and commercial property owners solve difficult roof coating challenges. One of its products, Ecuador roof coating, is approved and used by the top companies in the world. Ecuador has also been voted top green invention by the entrepreneur reality show Dragon's Den. Over the past 20 years, Tats has launched hundreds of products and services, co-authored Overcoming Inventoritis, the silent killer of innovation, with the foreword written by someone whose name is very recognizable, and that is Steve Wozniak, a co-founder of Apple. Spoken to a variety of industry groups, including the Chartered Accountants of Canada, the Canadian Bar Association, the American Chamber of Commerce, and the International Internet Marketing Association. And he's also written articles for Fast Company, Construction Today, Industry, and been quoted on CBS News, Global TV, CBC, and in the Globe and Mail and BC Business. Kind of interesting, don't you think, folks? Tats, it's a privilege to welcome you to a conversation on the Soft as Steel podcast.
Wow, thank you, Dennis. I don't think anyone's gone through that profile and read it out before. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just curious about a lot of things, right? So I think that's where it all starts in terms of all these things I've been part of.
Yeah. And I would say, to jump right in, because when you say curious in my view is a quality of a person, is a soft skill. And so, to describe someone as curious says a lot about them without knowing much. You simply say that this guy is incredibly curious, and you automatically have a sense of what they're all about. Curiosity is something that fuels individuals to try to find better ways, find better things, find better people, do so many things that are vital to business and other enterprises, and also just to human relations. So starting as a curious guy is a pretty good place to start. When I say soft skills, you know where I come from on this. I wrote a book. I'm doing this podcast, and soft skills is what we talk about almost the entire time. What's your first set of thoughts around this whole notion of why someone, in this case me, would want to try to have a dialogue, try to keep talking about the importance of people's qualities?
Yeah, I mean, I started out just being really fascinated about ideas and how ideas spread, right? And entrepreneurship, because a lot of these new ideas come in some sort of entrepreneurial activity or spirited activity. And was lucky enough to have a mentor who, his name is Peter Rosen. He invented the Windows Media Player, so invented the ability to watch video on a computer. He worked on some early 3D printing technology, and this was before there was so much information online about people's history, stories, their thoughts. We're truly blessed, right? Your podcast, my opportunity through my podcast to literally hear people's sort of insights and stories that we would never had the opportunity to know 20, 30 plus years ago. So it's just kind of really started from there. But I think what I learned along the way was there's idea dissemination, but it all comes down from soft skills. And what it took me a very, very long time to learn was in order to bring an idea to life or to try things, you need to develop a team, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses. And to build an effective team has a lot to do with knowing what your own strengths and weaknesses are and having the soft skills to relate to people, help build people up, cooperate with people. And, me being a bit more of an introvert, that came slowly. But as I got better at that, my results got better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a fabulous mouthful of thoughts. Yeah, I guess if I'll go to a question to force you to zero in on one item, and that is in thinking about leaders, which are obviously I would refer to myself as a thought leader, I guess. You are a thought leader, but also an entrepreneurial leader in many ways. If you had to pick, one quality, one soft skill, which you would view as being absolutely essential to being able to be effective as a leader in an organization, what would it be?
I mean, I think it generally starts with listening, and then you just kind of build from there, right? Your ability to really listen. I had a guest once that was an expert in listening, mm-hmm. and I asked her, what do you need to be a better listener? And she says the most sort of interesting thing that threw me off is that she says no matter how hard we try, we are not very accurate at listening. We can mm-hmm. try. But she mentioned that there's always a layer of bias that is happening all the time. So, which doesn't mean we should give up. It just means that we just have to keep trying to get better at it, knowing that there's always a possibility of misunderstanding or not fully understanding what is going on. But that just started me to path on really just paying attention to it more. And I think podcasting really helps because, like yourself, you're interested in learning. Is when you ask a lot of people questions, I felt early on I was very almost predicting some of the answers or trying to predict, even mm-hmm. in areas that had some background knowledge. But about half the time, I was completely wrong on what I was anticipating, and it just drew way more awareness on what I didn't know and how I should just sit back and just take that in a bit more. So I just every day I'll just try to be a little bit better at taking that in because I feel like that's the starting point of where you need to go from it.
Yeah, I agree. Just the way it's the way you said that. I mean, you do understand that just that thinking that you knew what the answer was going to be is a prime example of one of the barriers to good communication. Rather than listening attentively, you were processing in your mind what you were going to say next. And that's something we all do. And as you know from your learning journey, when we think about listening as a quality, I would say the quality would be to describe someone as a good listener, maybe even a great listener. The skill that's embedded in that quality is listening itself and understanding how to go about doing it in a manner that will help you produce better results. And that means, among other things, that you've got to fight the accumulation of the bias that you've developed over your lifetime. You've got to fight distractions. You've got to fight presuming you know what the answer is going to be. All those battles that have to be won in order for you to be able to do a better job of listening when there's so much, even in a transactional way, there's so much at stake. And again, as an introvert, it makes absolute sense that listening is something which you are relatively better able to do. Again, because you'd rather not be talking. And I don't mean that literally, but in general, that's the thought. But beyond that, the idea that it is a skill, and the importance of seeing it as a skill. And it's part of the bigger skill that I think is fundamental to all of us. And I'm doing it right now, and that's communication. You and I are communicating with each other. So I'm not going to do all the talking. We're going to be exchanging thoughts and ideas, answering questions, saying other things. And because we're interested in making the best use of our time together, we're both going to be doing probably a better than average job of listening. But that's not the case for everybody. And particularly when we think about the leaders at the top of organizations, who if they don't get the idea that one of the things that makes me a great leader is something I'm not particularly good at, and that is the skill of listening. And if I want people to get to know me, I have to demonstrate that I have interest in them, that I care, that I want to get to know them. And the way you do that is not by running your mouth. Your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that, every day I just try to figure out how I could be a little bit better leader than I am, the last day. And I think I understand more as I go along that there's just different ways of accomplishing one thing. Books sometimes try too hard to say this is the one way, but I've seen leadership work in so many different ways. And I almost feel like as you're developing, you just have to try different things and to see how it can work for you. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes, sort of topics get sort of broken down into this is what you must do. And I think there's a certain range that can work. And just paying attention to other people, how they approach things stylistically is really important. And I think I could give different examples on how things that shouldn't work, right? And I think being okay with that, maybe it wouldn't make a good book or it wouldn't make a good story. But when something is working, there's nuance to that because as humans, we're all so different. We have to appreciate and allow it to happen sometimes.
Yeah. I absolutely. Let's jump into a different part of this. And I want to use a quote from my mentor, a guy named Steve Farber, who in his first book 20 years ago included this set of phrases. He says, "Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do." Do what you love in the service of people who love it. Well, how does that feel to you? That set of phrases. What does it mean to you?
I like that. I like that. There's nuance to that, right? If you really think about it, because some people only have the first part of it, right? Mm-hmm. And if you just do one part of it, it doesn't quite work out for different people, right? So I think inherently business or things that happen in life are a little complicated. And the people that understand or appreciate the nuances or the fact that many things are not very linear are going to win. I think also that people that manage contradictions, like for instance, in business, you as a leader, you have to be confident, but you also need to be humble, right? So what does that look like, right? How do people express that? So I think those are the people that can sort of understand the imperfect nature of that and can embrace both sides of that are the ones that are for my opinion, just the most skilled.
Yeah. What a fine line to manage between confidence and humility. But it says it you're exactly right. When I think about great leaders, the words that come to my mind are leaders that demonstrate humility, are leaders that are listeners, and they're very good listeners, and they're also people that are caring. Those are the big three for me. And in the last few years, we've had a 2-year period of time where the challenge for everyone was to live through something they'd never lived through before. And for leaders, and I think I did it in a very amateurish way, I sat down at my dining room table with my microphone and my camera, and just extemporaneously offered thoughts to my vast audience out in my YouTube channel. But it boiled down to this. The only thing that you have to do right now, and this was again at the beginning of the pandemic, which is now in our rearview mirror in many ways, the only thing you have to do right now as a leader is to let people know that you care. Hard stop. That's all you have to do. You don't have to have answers. You don't have to have direction. You don't have to try to convince them they should get the shot or not get the shot. You don't have to do any of that. Just let them know you care. And that is, that's something which requires humility and requires confidence. Again, for it to be seeming to be genuine or authentic, which is one of my top 20 soft skills in the book I wrote a few years ago. The number one was, by the way, was trustworthiness, was the number one quality, which may seem obvious. Listening was up in the top, I believe in the top 5 or so, but good listening is there because it needs to be there. What are your thoughts about what I've just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think, caring is very powerful, right? It's the starting point. It shows your sharing, right? Shows the vulnerability side of it. But the base level, you just clarifies your intentions, right? What the priorities are. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, there's just a lot of things that we're involved in that when you get older and you see more things, there's a lot of things that don't matter, right? There's ups and downs and stuff like that, but it's just about the people that you care and the service that you provide to people. That's kind of sticks around a bit more, right? So I think just being very clear on your why is very important. And I think in areas of your life that you clearly understand what that is, I tend to think that goes better, right? Because you're more intentional with that. And as I get older, I realize that, there's just not one area. Every area is connected, right? So if you're doing and you're clear on one area, it, greatly impacts other areas of your life. So there's no, hey, I'm at work and this is personal. It's kind of all connected in some way. So, having awareness of that and having skills, whether it's in the workplace or in personal, it just makes everything better when you're developing on those soft skills.
Yeah. I imagine that your company has expressions that they refer to as being their values or their purpose. And I would imagine that they include words that are soft skills, as well as things that are, I'll call them technical or hard skills, like highest quality product, or tested and approved. All those kinds of things that give the buyer of your product, which is. And again, I've said before, and I think I may have said it already in this conversation, but I look at your company, and you have a leading product that is valuable to companies across the world, as you say, as I said in the introduction. But you truly are. It's easy for you to, I would think, to adopt this notion that I have a product, and with that product, I serve people. And when we do when our product is applied and it produces a great result for those customers, they're delighted with what we've done. And they let us know because the company is growing and people continue to buy it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you mentioned my bio earlier about helping launch companies, and some of those were ours. Many of those were just clients. And, so I got to see a lot of different industries. And, again, I mentioned before, I love the idea of idea dissemination, right? Ideas here and then it's in 2,000 stores. But as I sort of moved along and, got better at it, I was horrible at it. And I got, okay at it as I went along and did, all these different launches. I started to second guess some of the things I was helping to put out in the world, because you do have a choice, right? When I get older, I have kids, and you start thinking about what the next generation will face and what you're doing to help that along. I started to think, well, does the world need another one of these plasticky things, right? So and that's where we ended up on a sustainable plant-based technology that's, industrial use. And that's something that Peter actually accidentally invented. Is I felt that, hey, you could be an entrepreneur. You could, push for, profitability and success. And you could, at the same time, market and develop, superior products and things that are economically that make sense. So, and I felt, in the beginning, sustainability was all about just eco, and they had a lot of inferior products. But as it developed, I felt that there was a lot of room to just do the right thing while making the economics of it work as well. So I think for me, I just, it was very, very clear that, you could have all aspects of it as long as you didn't settle and you were pushing for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said. Well, I think that, again, your product is used in new construction and rehabilitation work, et cetera, the full gamut of the construction, building, and maintenance industry. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, I mean, we focus on the restoration side. I think that's where we are strong. I think bigger companies do much better on the new construction side. Mm-hmm. But I think we're always trying to innovate in our small way. But we're pushing.
Yeah. Well, so I think one of the thoughts that comes to my mind as I think about you and your company is again that when you wrote a book, Overcoming Inventoritis. Great title, by the way. Almost as good as my Soft as Steel title, I might say, but a little bit longer. But that's good. That's okay. And so, what are the major things that you learned from writing that book that constitute the qualities or skills, soft skills of people to be able to overcome what you call inventoritis?
Sure. There's a test called the 3 a.m. test. So imagine this: you have an idea and you're so excited about it, Dennis. You have to tell somebody. So it is 3 a.m., right? But you know what? You just can't wait for tomorrow. You have to tell your idea to someone. So you go to a prospect or someone that could give you feedback. You bang on their door. They don't open the door because it's very, very, it's in the middle of the night, but you're determined to talk to someone about your idea because it's going to change the world. So you break the door down. And then, they live upstairs. So you run up the stairs, you bust the door open, and you grab your prospect and say, wake up. And then you tell them your idea. And one of two things are going to happen. Well, actually, maybe three. But so one, they're going to listen to your idea and they're going to love it. And they're going to stay up with you all night to talk about it. Two, they are going to say, what are you talking about? That doesn't sound too excited. They're going to go back to sleep. Three, maybe they'll call the cops. But the point is, we, just like we form attachments to people, form attachments to ideas, especially the ideas that we give birth to or we come up with. And what happens with ideas is it's just you think it's a good idea. And there's just a lot of criteria required for an idea to become commercial success. So how do you market it? How do you manufacture it? How do you do what are the competitors? And many of the people that, jump at an idea and run with that without talking to customers, right? Not leading them into any, do you think it's a good idea? Going to your parents and saying it's a good idea. But, just people that are more critical or asking for pre-orders, that sort of objectivity disappears with some of this innovation stuff. And we just saw it over and over. When we were launching this product, people would come to us with ideas and they spent, part of their life savings on it. And it was a horrible idea. And it just kind of broke our heart to see people that would jump into this. So that's kind of what led to writing this book. And on the process of writing this book, we were so lucky to collaborate with so many other people. So how we got the quote for Steve Wozniak is our publisher, who's probably published 1,000 books now, but at the time only 10. connected us with all these people in Silicon Valley that invented different things like the zip drive and this and that. And they gave us all sorts of different feedback on how they commercialize their product. And he just happened to know Steve Wozniak as well. So again, extremely kind, humble person. Wrote a quote like him and Steve Jobs knew us very well. I mean, if you read the quote, they would think we're best friends, but we're not. But he's just a very humble and kind person that just gave us a chance.
Mm-hmm. Wow. If you have to choose, and let's talk about let's try to address this question or idea with the backdrop being the industry that I spent most of my career, and you've spent a chunk of time as well, obviously, and that's the construction industry. An industry that's described as being hardened. The steel-toed boots, the chewing tobacco, the excessive use of profanity. I could go on and on. Describes that industry. How can that industry change? And the only assumption there is that I believe that it needs to, that it just hasn't gotten where it needs to be able to embrace reasonably the idea of different generations, different values, the assault, if you will, or the arrival of technologies of all kinds that are impacting the building process in one form or another. How can you see a path forward for the industry to change, and what do they need to do to become more receptive to all of the dynamics I've described?
Sure, absolutely. So about 5 years ago, I started a podcast, right? Specify, which focused on construction building materials, but I originally just started it because I wanted to become a better entrepreneur, understand the construction building materials and industry better, because I think you're kind of alluding to is things can move slowly in those industries, right? So, and I realized that there was not one person I could go to that kind of had a grasp of everything. So what I started to do was interview different people from different aspects of the industry. Like, all these things are interconnected in some ways, but they don't always talk to each other. So I spent the time to start to talk to people. And what I noticed was there was more people with the social media, with technologies that would start to connect people to other aspects of it, whether it's just by doing the interviews and sharing what different people go through in their industry, but also connecting good people that want that change to occur. So I think just if you look at the technology industry and you look at how that industry is developed, there's a lot of knowledge sharing that occurs in that industry, like that build in public movement, which, some people will detail out all the revenue they did, and they would say, this is where I went, these are my partners, everything is transparent, and there's so much knowledge sharing. I think in the construction industry, that knowledge sharing is starting to happen more now. And as we share more, instead of hiding the secret sauce and being skeptical but just sharing your struggles, your successes, your tips, even about your own life, I feel that, we can understand what different groups' objectives are better, right? And as you connect the dots between the different groups, what I learned that the people that are very, very successful in making a project smoother are the ones that have relationships across those quote unquote traditional silos, that they can get people within certain groups to make certain concessions depending on the projects to make the entire project a success, because there's individuals that can communicate what it looks like to the end customer or the goals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those are terrific thoughts. And a couple thoughts came through my mind. One, you're kind of you're tiptoeing around the outer fringes of talking about another consideration in dealing with other human beings, and that is the challenge of being able to make a connection with people, and then go from there to build a relationship. And lastly, the importance of something which we haven't touched on, but I'm going to take a couple extra minutes so we can, and that is the importance of appreciating that a person's emotional intelligence, referred to in a lot of literature as EQ, is vitally important in trying to create those relationships one at a time, and that in more cases than not, those folks who are in the leadership roles, if they have high levels of emotional intelligence, meaning they're self-aware, they can manage themselves, they pay attention to what other people are feeling as they engage with them, and then they work to build those relationships, that those folks are the ones that are the most successful, whereas the ones that think they're the smartest person in the room don't always win the game, so to speak. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I learned this from Bob Berg, who wrote The Go-Giver, and there's 3 types of weaknesses. And I was like, well, what is that? Right? Mm-hmm. So he kind of laid it out like this. These are examples I use, but he says there's one type of weakness, and one of my weaknesses, I'm a terrible cook. And luckily, my wife doesn't care. She wants no part of that experiment. I've offered to improve my skills, but she's not interested. So weakness number 1 is a weakness that doesn't need to be improved, right? And then there's weakness number 2. So, one of the things that I had to learn, and I'm still constantly trying to learn, is the financial aspect of the business, right? So there's 3 buckets. There's demand generation, there's operations, and there's doing it profitably. So I've never met any entrepreneur, no matter how skilled they are, that are good at all 3. I think some of the best are good at 2 out of the 3. But I think the minimum requirement is you need to be good in 1, and then you need to mitigate the other 2. So you need to be at least average with help, right? If you if you have low knowledge, you're not going to be able to interface, but you need to be average, or you need to meet a certain threshold to be functional. But so weakness number 2, depending on your goals, because everyone has different goals, is weaknesses that you have to at least mitigate, right? Now, weakness number 3 is, let's say, you're not a good, let's say, speaker, or, you're not good at inspiring people through speeches, right? There's a listening aspect, and there's also being able to communicate a vision and stuff like that. Now, if you're doing something fairly small or contained, maybe that's okay, right? Maybe you could just maybe you don't need it. Maybe you can just mitigate it. But let's say you're trying to be like Elon and change the industry, although his speaking style isn't, what you sometimes you'd expect in a speaker. He has a style that has the ability to get a lot of people to move on things, right? So for me, he's world-class, but he wasn't world-class. He realized in order for him to fulfill the various visions he has for various things, he had to take his weakness and turn it into a strength. So, soft skills, yes, there are some jobs that you can do with very little soft skills. But if you want to improve, you want to be a leader, you want to inspire, make a big impact, that soft skill needs to be an absolute strength.
Well, we couldn't have scripted those last thoughts more perfectly as the final thoughts of our very quick but really enjoyable conversation. Tats, we could easily talk for a much longer amount of time. I hope we will find excuses to do that and maintain our connection. I enjoyed talking to you thoroughly, and I really appreciate your coming on the podcast and sharing your ideas and your wisdom and your enthusiasm and just your plain old humble brilliance. Because there's no doubt I'm talking to a guy that's got a lot of marbles up here and you use them very well and you do it in a really positive way. It's been a delight to have you. Thanks for coming on my show.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us today for this episode of the Soft as Steel podcast with your host, Dennis Doran. Dennis is the author of Soft as Steel and a leading speaker and trainer for organizations across many industries and verticals. To learn more about the work Dennis is doing to activate soft skills in the workplace, contact him at DennisDuranSpeaking.com. Be sure to check out his book, Soft as Steel, on Amazon or wherever books are sold. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you'd like to get your podcasts. And please remember to share this episode with your friends, colleagues, and anyone you feel would benefit from the conversation. We'll see you next time on the Soft as Steel podcast with Dennis Doran.